The post-mortems revealed that the victims had been stabbed numerous times. It was using a weapon that at that stage they said was likely to be a knife, but not an ordinary, like either kitchen knife or something like that. Because of the injuries, they believed it was more like a hunting knife.
Yeah. Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised.
This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events, and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Grave Secrets. We're your hosts. I'm Annie.
And I'm Beth. Even though every episode's come out, obviously, still on a Monday, we've not filmed for like a week.
It feels like so long. I was thinking this on the way here.
Yeah, and it feels like ages.
It actually does, yeah. Feels like we're getting back into it.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh gosh, are we going to be any good? But hopefully you've been enjoying the episodes that have been coming out. I've actually been on a little holiday, which was a real novelty.
I know you have. I think that's why it feels like it's been so long, because I obviously went away.
Yeah.
And I was in Paris, so we had to put like filming around that. Yeah. And then now you've been away, so we've had to like put filming around that as well. And
I did not a complete digital detox, but I was barely on my phone the whole time I was there.
I think that's quite nice.
Yeah. It was needed.
Yeah.
But it just feels weird then coming back to it. I'd got like 18,
a million emails.
Yeah, 18 different unread WhatsApps that I was like,
oh no, there's nothing worse, is there?
So today we have another case study for you. This one has actually been recommended.
Yeah, it is. When I was researching, it is a really interesting case, but there is so much to it. There's loads of sort of theories on it from people.
Yes.
And with our case studies, we like to do them from start to finish, and we like to give you an outcome. This one is going to be a little bit different because we don't actually have an outcome yet, because it is not due to go to trial until August 2025, which is obviously this year.
Yes.
So we are going to go as far up as we can, and then maybe we could do a little follow-up episode.
Yeah.
On, what actually happened at trial, because I feel like it's going to be quite a big one.
And I think at that point, maybe, because today we're not going to give you any of our theories, really.
No.
We'll add in kind of, obviously, bits like we do in terms of what we think about it.
I mean, we normally stick just to facts, don't we?
Yeah. But we're not really going to theorise.
We say that, but...
Well, yeah, it's suspicious.
It's hard not to.
So, yeah, we are just going to stick to it today. But, yeah, if we maybe do one, depending on how long the trial is at the end, and then we maybe do a little theorising at that point.
No, I think that'd be really good.
Yeah.
Because I never like listening to stuff that's unfinished.
No, I know.
And then in this one, it's like, we don't
be continued.
Yeah. But anyway, let's get into it.
So, as we mentioned, this one was recommended to us. It was actually by one of our new fans. So, shout out to Rhiannon. Thank you for suggesting this one. It's very complicated. So, cheers.
When we first started looking through, I was messaging Beth like, where are you up to on this? Like, it took me a while to get my head round, so I'm hoping we're going to be able to do it justice and tell it you in a way where you can all understand it as well.
So, let's get stuck in. This is a case that has become very high profile. There are a lot of theories around it, but ultimately it's an unknown motive. It's a murder in a small town. There were multiple victims, and it was a crime scene, interestingly, without significant forensic evidence.
Yeah.
As we've mentioned, it's a case yet to go to trial, and we're talking about the Idaho 4 murders today.
So you probably heard of this, like I'd heard of it, but I didn't know a lot about it. And obviously us being in the UK, you don't hear as much coverage on the US cases. But I think over there, this is one that has been quite prevalent in the news.
And interestingly, I'd heard of the murders but not as it referenced as the Idaho 4.
Yeah.
So when when Rhiannon first said cover the Idaho 4, just like that, I was like, oh, I've not heard of that one.
Yeah.
But then when I looked, I was oh no, I have. I've just heard of it as being college
Idaho murders.
No, I just heard of it as the college. I just knew of it as the college kids murders.
Right, okay, yeah.
But now if spoiler alert. So if we start with the kind of living situation, I think. So there are 5 girls that were living together in Idaho. It's a place called Moscow. Quite small town, really.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of different colleges around that area. But other than like a couple of bars and things, it's not like a built up area.
Yeah, it was quite a studenty area, wasn't it? Because it wasn't, where they lived wasn't like a typical student accommodation. It was actually a bit off the campus, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I thought, I didn't live anywhere like that when I was a student.
No.
You should have seen where I ended up living. It looked like quite a nice place, and it was actually a really large house that they lived in.
Yeah, and there was a big balcony out on the back, wasn't there?
Who got that bedroom up there? Like with
first
that one?
floor balcony, yeah. So the house was on the road called King Place, and the house was actually number 2211. So we're going to reference 2211 quite a bit. 5 girls living together, and their names were Kaylee, Maddie, Zaina, and then 2 other girls. Now, this is where it gets a bit complicated, because you can find out the other 2 girls' names.
Yeah.
However, there was quite a hush. Kind of, I don't know how best to describe it. There's been quite a lot of privacy around the 2 surviving victims, obviously quite rightly so, because they did survive, the attack that we're going to talk about today. But they have been obviously involved because it took place while they were in the house. So there's quite a lot of evidence from their mobile phones that's involved and will be presented at trial. And then obviously their accounts of what's happened. So the names are out there, but generally speaking, they just get referred to as either roommate 1 and 2.
Or even their initials. Yeah.
So we're just going to stick with their initials today. It is out there if you want to, but again, we like to be obviously victim-minded.
Yeah.
They are still victims.
Yeah.
And so we're just not going to reference their names.
Yeah.
So get that out of the way now. So there's the 5 girls. 2 of them had actually been friends for years, like since school.
Yeah.
Maybe since they were like 5 or 6.
It said since 6th grade, what I found out, and I couldn't work out what 6th grade was in English years. So it was actually Kaylee and Maddie were originally from Idaho, so they knew each other before university.
Yeah.
And they'd sort of like, in a way, grown up together and then ended up going to the same university, so naturally becoming housemates. They did study different courses. I think one was studying marketing and one was studying, I think it was like called natural. I didn't know what it was. I thought it's very brief. A very brief degree,
Yeah.
So they'd both gone to the same university and stayed friends all the way through, which I thought was quite nice.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah.
So the 5 of them were really close, got on really well, all had separate bedrooms within the house. As we've mentioned, it's quite large. We'll probably put a photo in at some point or on one of the clips or something so you can see it.
Just to put it into perspective, it's over 3 floors and it was 6 bedrooms, so there was 2 bedrooms on each floor.
Yeah.
So that is massive, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And it just looked... Now, did you see any of the pictures from after the fact when reporters had taken photos?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it looked like a really lovely student. They looked like they'd made it really nice, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when... through what I could find out online, I'd seen some pictures of Kaylee inside the house. And I think these pictures were taken from her social media. And I thought, that doesn't even look like a student house. No. It looks like you're living in your parents' house or something, doesn't it?
Lovely.
Yeah, it was really nice.
So we're going to start with November the 12th. And this takes place in 2022. That day, all 5 girls were out and about and it was actually the last local college football game.
Yeah.
So the football team were called the Vandals. I'm assuming it was like last game of the season.
Yeah.
So they'd all said, right, let's go and watch the game, because obviously when there's not a lot else to do, football does become kind of the...
It's like a socialising thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And at this point, Kaylee had actually previously lived in the house, but she had moved out. And this weekend, she had come back to visit, obviously, Maddie. She'd come back for a night out.
Yeah.
in
Also wanted
particular.
to show off a new car. She's got a very fancy new Range Rover.
Yeah.
Or Defender, or...
I think it was a Range Rover Evoque from what I could see. Parked on the drive in the photos.
Yeah.
And to be fair, if you were driving that, you'd want to go and show it off to your friends, wouldn't you?
I'd be like, oh my God.
Yeah, look what I've got. So she'd just come over really for the weekend.
Yeah. So they went to the Vandals game, and then after the game, Kaylee and Maddie, again, who had obviously been friends for years, decided to go to a place called the Corner Club.
From what I could find, this was sort of like a bit like a sports bar as well. So it must
and it
have
didn't
like
look massive, really, did it?
No, but it must have been like if you've gone to watch the game, that must be the place you go afterwards, sort of thing.
And they then both went to like a mac and cheese pickup truck, which again, I wish we had things like that. Mac and cheese like pickup truck. Apparently, one of them had carbonara.
Okay.
And then returned back to 2211 at about 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah. There was a bit of controversy around how they got home as well. So in some of the research that I did, it said it looked like they jumped into something like a rideshare or an Uber.
Yeah.
And then on another one, it said they actually got a lift home from someone that they sort of knew of.
Yeah.
So there is still
some
a little
people said
bit...
pickup truck, but then I watched another documentary, and in that documentary, apparently at 1:56 a.m, a driver actually stated that he dropped the girls back off at King Place.
Right.
So
yeah.
Yeah, because I think because there has been footage, and obviously this case is quite complicated, so the families have got involved, and some of the family have kind of done their own detective work.
Yeah.
So some of the family have seen CCTV of them outside getting the food, then said that they'd seen a pickup truck, but then a driver is confirmed. So it gets complicated.
Yeah, it is quite a lot of confusion in this. But within the house, all 5 girls are out this night, and the 2 surviving victims, what we're referring to there, initials on these, so they actually went out as well. It was almost like everyone in the house went out, but separately.
Yeah.
So you've got Kaylee and Maddie who have gone out together. You've got the 2 surviving victims who went out together.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other housemate, Zana. Are we saying Zana or
Zayna?
Zayna had actually got her boyfriend over.
Yeah.
And he was called Ethan, and they'd also gone out separately.
Yeah.
So it was a typical Saturday night in a student house where everyone was out and about.
Yeah, and I thought it was quite nice. Obviously, it didn't end nicely.
Yeah.
But that they all sent to get back at the same time. Whether or not that was just coincidence, or whether or not they were like, let's do a bit of an after party at ours, I don't know. But yeah, so Zayna and her boyfriend Ethan were only about 300 yards down the road.
It was so
but they
close,
were at
wasn't
another
it?
frat house. So I say another frat house. They were at a frat house on another like campus. But they also got back about 2 a.m. So by 2 a.m, you've got the 5 girls that live there in the home, and then you've also got Ethan, Zayna's boyfriend. Maddie and Kaylee actually went to bed at some stage, but they decided, which I thought was really lovely, even though there's a spare bedroom, obviously, since Maddie's moved out, they were both in the same bed.
Yeah.
And much to my friend's dismay, I love it when
you get in their bed.
Yeah. And share a bed, because then you like giggling, aren't you, before you fall asleep, or before I get told to shut up.
And with this being like one of the typical student houses, it was known as quite a bit of a party house. There was always something going on there. So when everyone got in from this night out, even though it was 2 a.m., no one really went straight to bed, because Maddie and Kaylee will have been up chatting.
Yeah.
And Kaylee had also got her dog there with her that she shared with, I think it was her ex-boyfriend now. So the dog was there as well. You've then got Zaina, who has ordered DoorDash at 4 a.m.
4 a.m, and they believe that was delivered at about 4:15.
Yeah.
So again, nobody's going straight to bed, but ultimately they did then all go into separate rooms.
Yes.
Apart from obviously Zaina and her boyfriend Ethan, and then Kaylee and Maddie, who were in the same room.
So in these as well, so the 2 surviving victims were on the bottom floor.
Yeah.
Zaina and Ethan and Maddie and Kaylee were on the middle and the top floors. Yeah.
So what we're going to do now is talk about the following day for a second, because everyone went then to their separate bedrooms, and there was kind of nothing until 12 o'clock the next day. And it was actually, I think, 11:56 midday when a call came into 911, which ultimately alerted police to something having happened within the home.
This has actually only just been released. So on the 5th of March this year, the 911 call was released. Yeah. So we now know what happened and what went on in the call. And I actually listened to it. Did you listen to the call?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite confused. Again, you know what I'm like with dispatchers. I don't know whether...
I thought she was a bit brutal.
Yeah.
She was like... I know that they're not any... If you're a dispatcher, I know you don't have to be, sort of qualified as police or as anything. But she was... I thought she was a bit rude
quite
at times.
Harsh, I felt. Obviously, it's difficult because we now know what had happened. So you think, God, give them a bit of a break.
Yeah.
And obviously she's trying to get relevant information out of them so that she can then respond or get responders out accordingly.
But it's just a panic, isn't it?
There was no compassion there.
There was no calm down, girls. It's going to be okay. Someone's on the way.
Yeah,
don't worry.
Yeah.
Just keep talking to me. She was like, stop passing the phone around. I've spoken to 4 people. I was like, maybe it's a thing in America, but I wouldn't expect that if I rang 9. If I rang 999 and that happened,
please be nice to me.
I'd be like, do you know what I've just been through?
No. So it was quite difficult, but I think some of that frustration came from, it was one of the housemates that had made the call, and she was clearly distressed, but she was quite vague as to what had gone on. She just kept saying, something bad has happened, we don't know what. So she's saying something bad's happened. Then she refers to the fact that they'd been out the night before. So again, maybe the dispatcher's thinking, college kids, what you judging.
One of the girls on the phone did say she had quite a lot to drink.
Yeah.
I think she's passed out, she won't wake up. And at this point, there's no names mentioned. It's sort of just a female.
Yeah, and then it does become more confusing because then a neighbour takes over the call. So originally it's one of the housemates that makes the 911 call. Then the neighbour takes over on the call and says, we don't really know what's happened. I've just come round to see what's going on. Then they say that the roommate has passed out and isn't responding. But then one of the girls, the roommate, says that she saw an unknown male.
Yeah.
So she then references that they've seen this stranger. And then at that point, they're like, is she breathing? They're unsure. They then get told to go back into the house, which again is pretty awful.
Yeah.
I mean, you can understand it because if someone is still living, then
they need help.
Yeah. But they then have to go back into the house. So then at that point, they're shouting for Zaina and Ethan. So it then becomes apparent that when they've been referencing this girl that's not waking up, it seems to be Zaina.
Mm.
There's no response from either of them. And then at that point, there's another voice. Now, that voice, again, his name has since been identified, but I've also seen that being hidden.
Right, okay, so we'll go with not mentioning
H.
that one as well. We'll call him H.
We'll call him H. So there's then another male who is quite clearly, he's now known as being a friend of the girls. They'd obviously called him over to the house. He's trying to keep everyone calm. He then tries and takes the phone, but that's when the dispatcher says, stop passing the phone around. And he goes back in there and obviously saw the extent of the events that had unfolded, and is then shouting at the girls to get out and
you can
leave
hear
the
him in the back
house.
of the phone call, can't you, saying, get out, get out, get out.
Yeah.
And later on, Kaylee's parents did actually speak on TV and say they were so thankful for him.
Yeah.
Because they actually stopped... they actually stopped the two surviving girls going
Having
in
to see it.
and having to see what had happened, and he sort of took that burden himself and didn't let them see, so he shielded them from it.
Two extracts from the statement that they put on Facebook.
It was really, I think it was really lovely, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm just going to read it because I do think it's important. So it was actually Kaylee's family that posted this. They said, after hearing that call, one thing is clear. H, with his quiet and stoic resolve, protected those girls from a nightmare that no one should ever be forced to witness. He stepped into the abyss, shielding them from horrors that will haunt him forever. For that, our family owes him a debt that words cannot repay. In closing, let us face the uncomfortable truth. Had the 911 call been made the moment that the accused had left the house, it still would not have saved anyone. Nothing would have changed. So we ask, respectfully please, do not waste your energy pointing fingers at those that could not have prevented it. The anger, the grief, and the pain, they must all be focused on one thing, one person, the one that stole the innocence of Moscow that night.
Yeah.
We demand justice, and that cause is all that matters now.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really good statement. And they are right. You know, he could only do his best.
Yeah.
And he absolutely
did. There was just a lot of accusations flying around and a lot of speculation, which there normally is in these type of things.
Yeah.
And people were saying... The issue was here is that the two surviving victims had actually said on the 911 call that they had seen someone in the house, but they didn't see them now that minute. They'd seen them the night before at around 4 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were saying, well, if they would have called the police, if you see a man in your house, you call the police, could this have been prevented? So this is where all this now ties together.
But at the same time, because it was known as a bit of a party house, you would have people coming and going.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have necessarily thought... I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because then we're going to talk about what actually happened.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that. Ultimately, the police then arrived on the scene and found that there were in fact 4 victims and 4 deceased.
So on the 911 call, it was only known at first that there was 1 victim.
Yeah.
And then when the police got there, it was them that then identified
a whole house of
4 murders had taken place in that house that night.
So I'm going to read out the victims' names now. Again, apologies if I don't get the pronunciation right. The victims' names were E10 Chapin, who was just 20 years old. He came from Conway in Washington. His girlfriend, Zaina Knodel, 20 years old, from Arizona. She'd later moved to Idaho. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, of Idaho. And Madison Mogan, 21, from Idaho. So... awfully, 3 of the girls that lived in that house were brutally murdered, as well as Zaina's boyfriend. It's just horrific. They were found in their rooms. So, as we mentioned earlier, Madison and Kaylee were sleeping in the same bed. So they were found next to each other, brutally murdered. And Zaina and E10 had also been in their room. So from the outset, this attack appears completely kind of unprovoked, premeditated, because someone has entered their room.
Yeah.
While Now, again, there's some discrepancy as to whether or not they were awake or asleep at the time. But again, if they're in bed, either way, they're in a vulnerable position.
Yeah, definitely.
And the attacker has come and then unleashed absolute awful,
it's
an attack on them.
The attacks were absolutely horrific, and I just think as well, when this sort of hit the media in general, how scared other people on the campus would have been, other college students. I know that the university did put things in place for people to come in and have counselling sessions, but a lot of the students did in fact just leave university and go home and do their assignments from home because they just didn't feel safe in the area anymore.
No. So Jasmine was Zaina's older sister, and she actually got a call stating that something had happened at 2211 home, and she only lived 15 minutes away. She was at Washington.
Right.
And she actually rushed over to the home, and based off the fact that her friends were messaging her and had said that something had happened at the home. So she drove her off there. The scene was already cordoned off at that stage. And then her and her dad, who she'd already also told to come to, because they didn't know what was going on, then got escorted to the police station. And it was there that they actually were told that 4 people were deceased. But they still didn't really know, again, anything. They didn't know what had happened.
Yeah.
They would have then obviously told them that one of them was their daughter and their little sister, which you just can't imagine.
I know.
At 20 and 21 years old,
you just don't expect them to go to uni and that to happen in general.
And again, when you're back from a night out, you everyone thinks that going out on the night out is the dangerous bit.
When you're back, you're safe,
in your own home, in bed, with someone that you love.
Yeah,
you just never ever.
And these were horrific. All 4 victims had been brutally stabbed, and because the police didn't sort of have a suspect straight away, I think they came under fire quite quickly.
Yeah.
For not having sort of any idea what had gone on.
What had happened? There was a lot of scrutiny about it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the postmortems revealed that the victims had been stabbed numerous times. It was using a weapon that at that stage they said was likely to be a knife, but not an ordinary either kitchen knife or something like that. Because of the injuries, they believed it was more like a hunting knife.
Yeah.
That did then align with what officers had found at the scene, because in the bed, unfortunately, next to Madison and Kaylee, there was actually a knife sheath.
Yeah, which this was probably one of the only pieces of evidence that the police found at the scene. So that's obviously frustrating for the police. But to leave the knife sheath, so sheath is like the covering for the knife, is like quite a big piece of evidence to leave behind in general, isn't it?
The sheath itself was for a hunting knife, so they did then know that kind of confirmed what they'd said at post-mortem, that it was a hunting knife, and they then knew what kind of knife they were looking for. Ultimately, they believed that it was Maddie who was murdered first. That would have obviously woken up Kaylee, because they don't believe that the girls knew that someone had entered the room prior to the attack. She, unfortunately, due to where the bed was actually up against a wall. So Maddie was on the outside and Kaylee was on the inside. So it's believed that obviously Maddie was murdered first because she was on the outside, and then Kaylee did try and get out of the bed to try and escape. But unfortunately, she
couldn't
was
get
then
out,
also killed. Again, post-mortem suggested that the girls had been stabbed between 4 and 4:25 a.m. Again, how they've got that specific, I think, is based on other pieces of evidence as well as...
I think it must be, because if we look back at what we said earlier, you've got the DoorDash guy delivering the food at about 1:15. You've got Zaina still having activity on her TikTok account up until 4:12, which is basically until DoorDash came, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then you've probably got time for them to take the food in, eat the food
Yeah.
or whatever. So I think it is probably on that evidence that they know that Zaina was still alive around those times.
Yeah.
And that I think maybe that's how they've narrowed it down so much and so specific.
They also believe that the killer came in and started the attack on the 3rd floor. That's where the kind of attack began, and they think that potentially, and again this is all very circumstantial, that Zaina was killed when she went to get the DoorDash, and she potentially came across the killer, which is then why her and Ethan were killed.
Yeah.
There is quite a lot that's sort of known, like we don't know whether they ate the food, we don't know whether she was taking it back to the room, we don't know whether she came across the killer and ran back into the room, because we don't really know how Zaina and Ethan were found, or I didn't find anything about how they were found. So we don't know whether they were in bed, or again, whether or not she'd seen them, tried to go back into the room, and then they were attacked.
So in this case, the police actually, I don't want to say withheld the information, but kept everything really close to the chest.
Yeah.
Because they didn't actually have a suspect, they didn't release a lot to the public at first. And the only reason that we know that Kaylee and Maddie were found in bed together is because at one of the vigils, their parents were talking and said they were found in bed together. So that was something that had not actually been released to the public at that time. So it was sort of like small bits of information were coming out bit by bit. And I find this goes all the way through up to now.
Yeah.
It's really hard, and like the 911 call has only just been released on the 5th of March, which is a couple of weeks ago. And then you've got the text messages between the surviving victims that we're going to go into. And they were only released not long ago either. So there's a lot that people didn't know. And I think for the families in particular, this must have been very stressful to not really know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And I know that Kaylee's dad has been quite sort of like the face of a lot of the communications, and he said, look, the police have told me that they are doing every single thing they can, and I've sort of just got to trust that they know what they're doing and let them do it, even though even the family wasn't getting up like regular updates on the case. It weren't like they were following it through bit by bit. It was, everything was kept so secretive in this, like even files were sealed, weren't they?
Yeah, it is very strange. The whole thing is very strange.
Yeah.
Again, what you've now got is you've got a scene that's cordoned off. You've got an attack that's taken place over 2 floors of a student home. Police now don't know who the attacker is. They can't find the actual weapon, the actual knife itself. They've searched around, obviously, the local area. And they don't know ultimately whether or not this is a stranger attack, or whether or not it was someone that either the girls knew or that was known to them.
And if there's even a motive in this.
Yeah. But at this stage, we do then have 2 living victims. Now, from the off, people said that was strange in itself.
Yeah.
If someone has entered a home and killed 4 people within that home, why have these 2 been spared?
So first of all, I thought that if the killer had come in at the top, maybe he's killed on the top floor and on the middle floor, and didn't expect anyone to be on the bottom floor, because you expect that to be your kitchen, your living room, not a bedroom.
Yeah.
But we later found out from the text messages that were revealed between the surviving victims that she was in fact seen by the intruder.
By the intruder, yes.
So this is where it does get a little bit tricky.
Yeah, so she gave an account that at about 4 o'clock in the morning, she was passing on the corridor, saw someone in all black with a black mask on, and just said that the only thing that she'd really noticed was that he'd got bushy eyebrows.
Yeah.
Now, again, I said earlier, if your house has a lot of people coming and going, you wouldn't have necessarily rung the police at that stage, because it could have just been anyone.
But if someone's got a mask on,
if they've got a mask on,
it's a little bit more sinister, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she said that he was coming towards her and she just shut the door.
Yeah.
But was there a lock on this door? Did the offender try to get into her room?
Again, it's all very unclear, isn't it?
And we don't have these. We're asking these questions, but we don't actually have the answers.
It's unclear, and also there's no evident. We don't know even why she'd left the room in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Like, Zaina had obviously left her room at some point before the DoorDash.
Yeah.
We know that Madison and Kaylee were just in bed asleep.
Yeah.
We don't know why or, one of these victims had left the house.
So the text messages between the two surviving victims were basically saying that they'd seen someone in the house. But I did think these were a little bit conflicting as well, because one of them said, I've just seen Zana wearing all black. It's freaked me out. But then later on, they refer to this person as he.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's some text messages missing in the middle. Like, I feel like they didn't release the full conversation to the public because it's almost like it's two different conversations.
Yeah, there is quite a lot of digital forensics in this case. Obviously from the victims in terms of when they were last alive or when there was last seen activity on their mobile devices, but then obviously these text messages.
Yeah.
Another text then stated that she thought she could hear Kaylee upstairs playing with her dog in her room. Madison's bedroom was also on the 3rd floor, and so there were noises quite clearly coming from that floor, and then she was trying to check in with Madison as to whether or not it was her playing with the dog.
And they were texting each other, and it's like one of the surviving victims had text Madison or text Kaylee and said, like, are you all right? And with the house like that and being students and you've just been on a night out, you probably couldn't be bothered to get out of bed and walk all the way up and find out what's happened. So they're texting between each other.
Yeah.
But she also said that she thought she heard Zana crying as well.
Yeah. And then in another account that I saw, one of the surviving victims said that she did get up on 3 separate occasions, went to check on the roommates. And it was the 3rd time that she was actually going to check on the roommates. At that point is when she saw this man. So it is all very unclear because... Was that why she was leaving the room? We don't know. Was it, she said it was Zaina, but then was it a man? Then is it this person with bushy eyebrows?
Yeah.
And again, she said that this person was only 3 feet away. So surely you would know the difference.
Yeah. And between these text messages between the housemates, the surviving victims, I found they were quite sort of like panicked. They were saying, I'm freaked out.
Yeah.
So that's when these text messages got released, that's why people are saying, well, if you were freaked out and you were scared and, they were saying, right, run to my room, my battery's going to die. Why didn't you ring the police at that time?
Yeah.
But there's no one that can answer that except the surviving victims.
The other thing that was obviously then brought into question is, as we've mentioned now, it's believed that they did all unfortunately die at around 4 a.m. Now, it's unlikely that there would have been a lot of noise necessarily because obviously the 2 girls were asleep or in bed at least. But why then did the 2 surviving victims wait until 12 midday the following day
to check on them or
or to ring? So again, that's something that we'll probably never get an answer to. They had obviously said that they'd been drinking the night before. It's unclear whether or not they were freaked out, but ultimately they then went to sleep, and it was only when they got up the following day. One of the surviving victims did speak to an officer when they arrived on scene and did say that she still thought she was a bit drunk, she was confused.
And that just takes
as if she had been asleep, I thought.
I feel like that, because you've said that you've had a drink as well, that immediately brings the witness statements into question as well.
Yeah.
How accurate are they? Can you remember things when you're drunk? How many drinks did you have? What was your vision like? Could you actually see?
Yeah.
You don't make rational decisions maybe when you've had a drink. So was that the reason that they didn't ring straight away?
Sooner.
Yeah.
Or did they just hear a few noises, get freaked out like you do?
Yeah.
They'd text the others, but they weren't replying. So did they just assume that they'd also fallen asleep? they've then fallen asleep.
Yeah.
And because they've been out, they've been up until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Did she then fall asleep, not wake up until 12 midday, went to check on them, and at that point she has rung as soon as she's found out anything's happened?
Yeah, we just don't really know, do we?
No.
And there's not much account out there from the surviving victims in person. It's all like through what other people have said.
Of evidence.
So you're trying to pull it all together.
So,
go on.
Sorry. So the investigation is moving quickly at this stage. They'd had over 19,000 calls to the tip line from the off, and there was a white car that had been seen passing the property 3 times between about 3:30 and 4:06. But it then pulled into the house for about 25 minutes and left, and then arrived at another location in an area called Pullman, Washington, about 5:30 a.m.
And as far as I can work out, they're not that near to each other, are
No, I think, if it took about... If they got there at 5:30,
Yeah.
then it could be anything from like half an hour to an hour.
So it's not like just a
distance.
next
No.
place along, is it? But luckily in this, the CCTV that covered the area could see that it was a white Hyundai Elantra. I think that's how you say it. And they knew that the police knew that they were looking for a 2011 to a 2013 model.
Yeah.
But this is a really popular car. And you can just imagine how many of these there are in the area. And now with the tip line open, how many people are ringing in saying, my neighbour's got a white, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
it'd be so complicated.
and the police were just working their way through all these sort of tips that have come in to narrow it down. So if someone says, oh, my mum drives this car or something, I don't know why you'd ring on your mum, but they'd have to go and sort of rule them out of the investigation and then move on to the next one. So it must have been such a long process, along with following all the other tips that are coming in as well.
Ultimately, they did find... Ultimately, I say it all the time. They did find the car parked outside graduate housing at Stiptoe Village, which again was in Washington, and then obviously they'd matched the license plate, and that license plate then gave them the name of their first real either person of significance. We're calling them a suspect at this stage.
He could have been a witness, he could have been a suspect, but he was there around the time that the police believe these murders happened.
So the name of the person that is revealed as owning that car is a man called Brian Kohberger. And at that stage, the police do actually get a warrant, and they're then able to retrieve cell tower data, which found that Brian's mobile at around 2:47 a.m. was in Pullman. It suddenly stopped collecting any data. That aligned with the vehicle being seen leaving the accommodation.
Yep.
So it is believed that he'd maybe turned his mobile phone off, which again is suspicious, because that tends to be what a lot of offenders would do.
People think that turning your phone off, that people don't know your location, but it's sort of just as bad as leaving it on and letting it ping on the cell towers, because you've turned it off, which, like we said, why would you turn your phone off? We've had this in a previous case, haven't we, where they've turned the phone off.
Yeah. So 2 hours later, his mobile phone signal is then picked up again, and this time it's south of Moscow, back towards his home. So we now know that he was in the area at the time.
Yeah.
And mobile phone data also showed that there were around 12 other trips to that area of Moscow where their house was.
Yeah.
And one of those was actually after the murders. So again,
it's sort of like the evidence is... It's starting to stack up, isn't it? Because why would there be 12 trips? You know, you live in Pullman, Washington, which is around 9 miles away. So it's quite... It's not like just round the corner.
Yeah.
As far as you know, there's no link between the victims and the suspect.
No.
But yet the car's been seen 12 times within the area.
Yeah.
You know, and then you start to think, as something being...
and for one
premeditated.
and for one to be after the offence, again, we know that offenders do sometimes like to revisit the scene. So is it potentially that is what has happened? Kohberger was obviously questioned as to his whereabouts on the night of the attack, and he did admit to being out in the car, but said that he just liked driving around at night and taking pictures of stars and things.
Yeah.
Now, again, they have found photos on his mobile of stars and things like that, so it does look like he did do that. But again, is he creating an alibi for himself?
Yeah.
Was it premeditated at this stage? They don't know.
And because he was out and about at the time, on his own, there was no one to give him an alibi. So this is one of the problems now, with it coming up to trial. He has got no one to vouch for him, has he?
So obviously they start looking into his background, and he's quite an interesting character in that he was known as being socially awkward at school, but then lost an awful lot of weight due to starting kickboxing. So at that point, he then decided he wanted to be in either the military or in law enforcement. But we do know that he got kicked out of a programme that was designed to get people into policing. And again, it's unclear really as to what he'd done to get kicked out.
Still all very hush-hush, isn't it?
Yeah.
But after that, he sort of went to college. He got his... it was psychology, wasn't it, that he did to start with?
Yeah, but did you not see that he had a heroin addiction?
Yes,
somewhere.
I did, yeah.
Because again, this is all very strange, because some people are saying that, like, friends of his were saying that, oh yeah, he did used to do heroin, but then he got sober, and then he got his associate degree in psychology, and then got a master's and specialised in criminology. But again, what, you just had like a couple of months where you were on heroin?
Yeah, apparently it was a really prevalent thing at the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of the friends as well. And I think it was something to do with the area where that sort of drug was really prevalent.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were getting addicted, and apparently he knew a lot of people that had died from it as well.
Yeah.
And somehow managed to, because it is like an awful drug to be able to get off,
yeah.
But he'd somehow managed that and turned his life around from what we can make out at this point. So you've got a degree in psychology, you've gone on to specialise in criminology, and then he'd even gone on to study a PhD.
Yeah, so studying a PhD, but then actually got kicked out of Washington, and he got a teaching assistant job somewhere, but he actually got kicked out of that. Now again, we don't know exactly what caused him to lose his job and to get kicked out.
Yeah. I did see something that said that he was very, very socially awkward.
Yes.
So the teaching job just wasn't fitting for him, because he couldn't communicate how he should be, and he couldn't. But then that's not enough to get kicked out
for dismissal, is it?
No, you'd say like, oh, we'll find something else. I'll give you a good reference or whatever. Not you are going to get kicked out because of this.
Interestingly, because obviously he did specialise in criminology, one of his academic papers from 2020 is potentially going to be used as evidence at trial.
I thought this was really interesting. And he was talking in this paper as well about how he can help the police in these situations.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, that's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? To use his own paper against him.
Yeah. So at this stage, he's a suspect. They're obviously building a picture of what he's like. They didn't know that he had any connection to the house, to the victims, but obviously he has an interest in crime, but they need to place him at the scene. So forensics obviously is involved, and they'd actually looked at this knife sheath. It's a difficult one.
It is, isn't it?
And there was a little, like a button, almost like a popper, that held the knife into the sheath. And there was actually a bit of blood, I believe, because it said male DNA, so I'm assuming it was a droplet of blood.
Or maybe could it have been, skin?
Yeah,
cells.
Unsure.
Some form of DNA was actually found
on that snap button. So they're still trying to find the murder weapon, because ultimately that would be a huge breakthrough. but they're now trying to find a match to this male DNA.
Because this is actually what's going to connect him to the actual crime scene. Because at this point, you've got him in the area, you've got him pinging the cell phone towers, you've got him turning his phone off, but there's nothing to actually place him at the scene of the crime. So this DNA obviously was taken from the knife sheath, and then it would just get run through the database.
Yeah.
And in this case, it wasn't his DNA that came up on it, was it?
No. Also, we look at pictures of him, and you could say he has bushy eyebrows based on the testimony, obviously, of the surviving witness, but is that really enough to go on?
Or just someone with bushy eyebrows? And like,
she also said that she couldn't categorically say that was him.
And bushy eyebrows, I feel like, are different for different people. But because the police have now not got a DNA match through the database, they now go to, which I thought was really clever, they now turn to other forms of DNA, and they looked on Ancestry websites. So, you know, when you give your swab or your DNA and it matches you up, I mean, I've done it to find out things on my family tree.
Yeah.
So that means your DNA is out there, and you don't think about that at the time, do you? And they were actually able to work through a family tree from public records and narrow it down. And one person from the family tree lived in the area 9 miles away in Pullman, Washington. So here, this is where they find the family tree name, Koberger. So even though it's not directly him, it was the DNA that they matched was to the father.
Yes.
But they then knew from the DNA that it wasn't him, it was a child, they said, didn't they?
Yes.
Of the person whose DNA they've got. So now this is probably the closest lead.
Forensic lead, isn't it?
Yeah, that
they
they've got.
also obviously wanted to double check this. So what they did, and I found this really interesting as well. So Koberger and his must have in mid-December, so this took place in November, but in mid-December, Koberger and his dad were doing quite a lengthy journey, and they actually got stopped twice for traffic violations while they were on this journey.
This was crazy. Did you see the
footage?
I want to say body cam footage now, like you do. Dash cam footage of this. And I found it quite eerie.
Yeah, he seems very calm and collected. He hands over his ID and stuff like that. But ultimately, they then kind of followed them back to the family home in Pennsylvania. And investigators then conducted like a stealth operation and went and got the rubbish out of the bin and then tested it. So they actually found DNA in the bin, which came back as what they already knew was a high probability match to the biological father of the DNA, which was found on the sheath at the scene. This then gave them enough to get an arrest warrant at that point for Brian Koberger. And he was then arrested at his parents' home on December 30th in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania.
Did you see that when he actually got arrested, he was going through the bins and he was separating out all the rubbish into Ziploc bags? So it was almost like he knew that the police were looking for something and knew they were looking for his DNA, and he was separating them out, and he was seen previously putting them in the neighbours' bins. So anything that he had touched, he'd put in a separate bag to his mum and dad and put in someone else's bin.
But then you'd think if he had a knowledge of DNA, then they could have done the familial thing. Do you know? Anyway.
Yeah, he was studying a PhD. You'd think he'd know.
Yeah. So ultimately, he was arrested as a fugitive and then extradited back to Idaho. So on the 5th of January 2023, he was then charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of the word I can't say.
Felony burglary. And then on May the 17th, the grand jury handed down an official indictment on all charges. So it works a little bit different in the US to what it does over here. So when we're researching these American cases, it takes me a bit longer to get my head around. Does it you?
It's confusing.
Like all the whole grand jury thing. Yes. I know just from watching American like drama TV programs sort of thing. But we don't know a massive amount really about Brian Koberger in general. We just you know, as far as we can see, he came from quite a normal family.
Yeah, he was
had two
older,
sisters.
So he was slightly older, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Because obviously he was studying his PhD, whereas they were at uni.
Yeah.
But again, it's the lack of forensic evidence that's kind of really hindering.
You've got one thing,
case.
you're relying that entire case on a piece of DNA.
They still haven't found the knife. It was believed to be a K-bar knife,
Yeah.
which again was used for either
That
combat
hunting one.
or hunting. Obviously, they've got his mobile phone pinging in the area. The scene itself, the home, we don't really know the extent of the evidence or the blood and things like that in the home, but there was actually blood dripping from the outside of the house.
Yeah.
So there must have been an awful lot, obviously, expectedly, a lot of blood. But what I cannot get my head around is that house has actually been torn down.
Yeah. So in a way, I thought, like, fair enough, hand it over to the university and I thought the university would just keep it as it is until the trial.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Or until someone's been convicted.
Yeah.
Then as soon as someone's been convicted, quite rightly, tear it down.
Yes,
you don't want it to be rented out again. You don't want anyone else to have to live there with what's gone on.
Yeah.
But I was just so shocked that university tore down that when the whole case is hinging on one piece of DNA evidence.
Yeah.
Like, there could have been more evidence in that house and it's been destroyed.
So they've said that they took 3D images of the home, and the prosecution and defence, again, apparently both agreed that there was nothing more of evidential, no, I can't say that either. Evidentiary value.
Yeah.
In that home, so they said, yeah, okay, we'll tear it down. But 3 of the 4 families did not agree with that decision, and I completely understand that. To me, it is crazy. Even if you've got 3D images, what if they've not searched the house properly and the knife is still hidden somewhere under a floor? Do you know what I mean? Like, I know they'll have done thorough searches, but at the same time, it just
you just can't
seems
help but thinking
crazy.
Until you get that conviction, you wouldn't tear the house down.
Yeah.
And at this point, there's still no connection or motive. But however, Kaylee's parents did say that there was an Instagram account under Koberger's name that did follow Kaylee and Madison. Yeah. And shortly after the murders, it disappeared. So did he already know of the girls?
Yeah.
We don't know if this was a targeted attack on one person that then led to 4 people getting killed, or if it was we still don't know anything.
No. It's also not been verified that account was him.
Yeah.
It's not been verified that it was from his device.
That's just come from Kaylee's parents. Yeah.
But again, it's something to kind of bear in mind. Linguistic evidence is also then brought into question, because what was the case that we covered where they ended up going back to the cells when someone had given a confession in the prison,
and they
actually got the jury to go out and listen to see whether or not they could hear him read Harry Potter. That case,
we've covered it recently, and I can't remember what it is for the life of me.
But in this case, obviously, we have got 2 surviving victims that heard muffled noises, potentially Zaina crying, had heard loud noises. And so it could have been possible, in terms of audio analysis, at trial, to get the jury members to go back into the home, go into the surviving victims' rooms, and then recreate these noises to try and decipher
if it could
what
be
might
heard.
have happened. But you obviously can't do that now, because you've
now the house isn't
down
there.
The house.
Yeah,
so
it's absolutely crazy. And I know that for this, obviously because it's not gone to trial yet, jury selection did start in October of last year. But the case is obviously not due to go to trial until August.
Yeah.
But the trial is now set to take place in a place called Boise, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is 6 hours away. And this is so Koberger gets a fair trial. And we've had this before as well, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Because when something's in the news that much in that area, people want them to be convicted that badly.
Yes.
They feel like it might not be.
I feel like everyone knows about this case anyway now, so it's a bit futile, but you can understand why they do it.
Yeah.
So it's due to begin on the 11th of August. Initial filings have been made. They are expecting the jury to be selected in July. But ultimately, there isn't a lot of forensic evidence linking to Koberger.
No.
They did also find on his phone that he'd taken a selfie just a few hours after the murders.
They actually used that selfie to then say, like, do you think he's got bushy eyebrows? Didn't they? That was the selfie that they used because they knew that's how he looked on that day. And to be fair, I would have said he did have bushy eyebrows. So, but someone else might have said, oh no, they weren't that bushy.
No. He is, they do have evidence to suggest that he did buy a balaclava 11 months prior to the murders. But again, it's not conclusive.
No. And then also now the prosecution and defence are keeping their cards close to the chest with the evidence, but the defence have actually asked for the DNA evidence to be discredited because 2 other male unknown samples were found in the house and have not been tested. So they're saying, well, why was our client's DNA tested when
and not the others?
Theirs weren't?
Yeah.
What if he was... Maybe the prosecution is saying, well, it could have been working with someone, that could be someone else's DNA, or the defence are obviously saying, well, he weren't involved at all. So they're now the defence are trying to get rid of the death penalty.
They also don't even want some of the text messages to be used because they're saying that that's unreliable. So it's going to be an interesting trial for certain. But obviously, as always, we want to end with remembering the victims. So I've got a couple of different quotes from family members. So I thought we'd go through those to end.
Okay.
So I mentioned Jasmine earlier. She was the sister of Zaina. She said that Zaina was fun and uplifting and turned any bad situation into a good one. Her dad also said that he loved everything about his daughter and that she really loved her friends as much as she did her family and that she was a really happy person. What I think is really tragic as well is that quite a few of them had got kind of jobs lined up for themselves. I know that Madison had secured a job that she was due to start when they'd graduated. Kaylee actually received a posthumous bachelor's degree from Idaho University, which her family then went up on stage and took, which you just can't even imagine.
It's
the amount of pain.
isn't it?
Kaylee had accepted a job. It was an IT job after graduation, which unfortunately she was never able to start. Maddie's older sister, and I think this is really gorgeous, her older sister Olivia actually gave birth 6 months after the murder and named her daughter after both her sister and Kaylee. So her daughter's name is Theodora Maddie Kay. So Kay for Kaylee and Maddie.
That's lovely.
Interestingly as well, and this is one of these things where, like, do you believe in fate? Because the room number in the hospital when she gave birth was 1113, which was actually the date of the murders.
Wow.
And the time of birth was 4:21. So it's as if one life has ended and
another
has
started.
been created.
Wow.
So I thought that was really kind of gorgeous.
Yeah.
May 13th, 2023 was 6 months after the murders, and that was the graduation in which all 4 victims should have been celebrating.
Oh, yeah.
Ethan's parents, Stacey and Jim, have created Ethan's Smile because they said that he just had a gorgeous smile at all times. And Ethan's Smile now raises money for scholarships by selling tulips, because he actually worked on a tulip farm,
didn't he?
Which apparently he absolutely loved. Him and Zaina were completely happy together. They were, planning on starting a life together.
The friends described them both as like just totally matching each other's energy.
Yeah.
Like they were such a good match and always like the life and soul of the party.
What's really awful as well is there's a photo of them all, and the 4 that were ultimately murdered are in the middle and the 2 surviving victims are on the outside of the photo, and it's just completely tragic because they were just so young.
Yeah.
And obviously, no one deserves it, but it's just awful to think that they were literally in their home, in their rooms, safe, or should have been safe.
Yeah.
And 4 people have lost their lives. So, as always, we are remembering the victims. So that's Kaylee, Madison, Zaina and Ethan. And yeah, we shall have to wait and see for the outcome.
See what happens in August.
Yes.
And come back and give you a little trial update, I think.
Yes. So thank you ever so much for watching or listening. Again, thanks to Rhiannon for suggesting this case.
Yep.
I think we managed it.
Even though it was a hard one.
Yeah. And until next time, take care.
Bye.